Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Dina Limbacher from the HeForShe team. We are so grateful for all of you for joining today. I'm going to hand over straight away to our moderator, Calliope, to get us started. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Dinal, and hello, everyone. Very warm welcome to this important webinar today that HeForShe has organized and facilitated. A warm welcome from New York City, where we can see a lot of action arriving in the last few days. We would like to acknowledge the situation, and we remain in solidarity of what's happening for survivors of violence against women and more broadly. Just to welcome you and for joining this webinar, I'm Calliope Migiru. I'm the Chief of the Ending Violence Against Women section at UN Women, and I will be the moderator for this event today. I would like to welcome the participants to share their comments on social media and through the hashtags, hashtag HeForShe and hashtag Shadow Pandemic, and to tag HeForShe. I would like to remind us, all of us, that in the last few weeks, since the lockdowns and the outbreak of COVID-19, we have seen an increase in calls and reporting to helplines from domestic abuse survivors, also asking for urgent support and emergency shelters. And we have seen that around the world. Just to give you an example, and we're going to hear a little bit more later, that, for example, in France, since the beginning of the outbreak of COVID and the lockdown, we've seen an increase of reporting of domestic abuse up to 30%. But just to remind you that violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, is not a new phenomenon. And COVID-19 has not exactly created this violence. Already before the outbreak of COVID-19, we had very alarmingly high rates of domestic abuse. 1 in 3 women, at some point in their lifetimes, they did suffer some kind of sexual violence or physical violence. And just to remind you that 6 out of 10 women around the world have been intentionally abused and killed by their intimate partners. But we have some, and this just pre-existing crisis has been exacerbated by COVID-19, as we see that security, health, and money worries have created tensions within the household. I would like to emphasize that such violence and the gaps that we see in support services to survivors are very likely to increase and exist in the aftermath of COVID-19, and we all need to be prepared for how to respond to that. But there is some hope. We know increasingly that violence against women and girls, domestic violence, can be prevented and can be reduced. We have seen some evidence-based strategies that by engaging different actors and different stakeholders and having laws and policies in place and making environments safer, including workplaces, can contribute to prevention and responding better to violence and domestic abuse. It is a complex phenomenon, and we need the action of everyone in society in order to address it. And that's exactly what we will try to attempt to do today. And we have some leading actors from companies, from organizations, from the private sector, that they have been leading efforts in preventing and responding to domestic abuse and violence against women and girls around the world. And also, we know we already have 3 out of our speakers that they have been our HeForShe male champions, and meaning that they have already made some personal and organizational commitments to advance gender equality and address GBV to the extent it is possible within their organizations. And that's exactly what we're going to explore with them today, and to see also what's the role of men in these efforts to preventing and responding to violence against women and girls. We have with us today some experts from around the world, and we have Ariel Zwank, the CEO of Safe Horizon. We have Nick Reed, the CEO of Vodafone, Bruce Cleaver, the CEO of the De Beers Group, and Giles York, the Chief Constable of Sussex Police. I would like to start a warm welcome to all of you, and I would like to start with Ariel Zwank, the CEO of the Safe Horizons, which is the leading provider for services in the US to victims of abuse and crime in general. Ariel, you see what's happening now with domestic abuse in New York City, but also around the world, globally. If you can please share with us some of your reflections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Calliope. And I'm so glad that everyone is here, the panelists and those who tuned into the webinar to discuss this important issue, and thank you for convening it. You spoke about France and the increases that are seen there. We know that around the world, hotlines and reports and anecdotal reports are that with the additional economic stress, fear of disease, people being shut in as a result of lockdowns, that instances of domestic violence are on the rise. Not only in France, in Argentina, in Cyprus, calls rose 30%, in Singapore, in China. And so all over the world, we are seeing increases reported in use of hotlines, in calling the police, in the need for help for violent situations. What are we seeing here in New York? The story is a little bit more complicated. During the first, New York, Safe Horizon runs the New York City Domestic Violence Hotline. And what we saw is that in the first month, and of course we're an epicenter of the virus globally, that when people were afraid to go out, calls to our hotline decreased. It can't be that the violence decreased, but the calls decreased. And we understand that this is for two reasons. Number one, that people were afraid themselves of contracting the virus, perhaps by seeking services, by going to shelter. And number two, that they believed that help was not available. And that is tragic because help is available. And I know at Safe Horizon and in organizations around the country, some of our workers are essential workers who are providing services on site, and also nonprofit providers and those who provide help have shown tremendous ingenuity in providing services remotely and off-site. Here in New York, we're able to give clients, help them get orders of protection remotely, even though our courts are closed. And so these are things that are able to be done even in the midst of pandemic-based lockdowns. The National Domestic Violence Hotline has actually reported a similar pattern where initially, as cities were going into lockdown, there were fewer calls, but then in April, as the word has gotten out and we've helped to put the word out that help is available, we've seen more and more calls. And in fact, at the National Domestic Violence Hotline, their calls in April were up 25% versus where they had been before. And we're seeing that in New York City as well, that as messaging is getting out, that help is available, more and more people are calling, and you know, of course, the police are still responding to 911 requests, and people need to know that, and that's an important driver of people seeking help. This webinar is an example of that too, because we want people to know that help is available. And so the next part of your question was, what can people be doing now and in the future to help with this terrible situation of domestic violence that, as you said so clearly, existed before COVID-19 and is going to exist after COVID-19? What can people do? just a handful of things. And I'm sure that the other panelists will go more deeply into some of these areas. Companies can do what we do at Safe Horizon. We have something called a safety response team. That means that we know that as an employer, with 1 in 3 women in the world experiencing domestic violence in their lifetime, and we here in the US, 1 in 7 men we know experiences domestic violence in their lifetime. That means that anyone with a workforce is going to have staff who are experiencing at some point domestic violence. And companies that talk about it openly and that have procedures for dealing with it can be incredibly helpful to their staff. Our safety response team at Safe Horizon responds when one of our staff is in a violent situation, helping with things like transferring work assignments, other kinds of safety planning, so that not only it might be changing work hours or changing a work location, so that not only the employee themselves can be safer, but also the other colleagues in that workplace. And so that's just one idea that I will present as one that we use at Safe Horizon that companies around the world can consider. Another one is that governments must support this work. And Calliope, you mentioned the fact that after the pandemic lockdowns end, we expect to see an increase in calls for help because all those people that didn't reach out during the lockdown, we expect to reach out as well. That goes for adult victims and child victims as well. And that's going to be happening just when governments around the world are most dealing with the fiscal impact, the economic impact of the shutdowns. These services cannot be cut, must be funded, and the funding must be redoubled because the need will be redoubled. And this is absolutely an area, we know that in New York City, a major driver of homelessness is domestic violence. So cities and states and countries and jurisdictions that are responsible for maintaining the health and safety of their populations will absolutely need to invest in and be mindful of the need for these kinds of services. And in terms of individuals, be aware that friends and neighbors and even yourself may be in a violent situation, and again, that help is available. And whether that means finding where in your part of the world there's perhaps a chat line instead of a phone line, if that's safer for you, if it's a keyword that you prepare with your kids or with a neighbor that says, when I use this certain word, I'm in distress, I need you to help me call for help. It might be, putting up a shade or putting a plant in the window in a neighborhood distress. These are all strategies that people can use during the pandemic and during the lockdown to call for help. So I know there'll be more discussion, but let me stop there.
Thank you, Ariel. That was really useful to frame the discussion and to add to what we are going to discuss later. I think you raised a very important point that we have seen in some cases decrease of calls and reporting from survivors because they don't know if the services, support services to them, they are still retained as essential ones during the breakout of COVID. And that's why it's important raising awareness, including through the police forces, about this kind of service. And we're going to hear more from Giles later, is very important. And also, I think it's very important you refer to workplaces and how our own employees and colleagues, they are a part of the population, including the United Nations. We have similar phenomena that they have been suffering domestic violence during the lockdown. And I think we're going to hear some very promising practices later from our panelists. And I would like to turn to Nick Reed, the CEO of Vodafone, because Nick, Vodafone has been putting in place some very promising practices. Also by leveraging technology, for example, such as the Bright Sky app, in order to help women who have been impacted by domestic abuse and violence more generally, but also supporting your own employees and staff. For example, last year you were the first company that introduced the 10 days of paid leave to support your employees, to find support, to follow the court proceedings, and to make sure that they are prepared to return to the workplace. So if you can please share with us how Vodafone has adapted its policies and its work in view of COVID-19. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say immensely proud to be a HeForShe champion and our involvement. Also privileged to be here today. I think addressing a really important subject, which is the shadow pandemic. When we introduced the policy you referred to 12 months ago, I don't think we could have envisaged the world that we have today, and just witnessing the increase in domestic violence that's being caused by the coronavirus. So it's more relevant and more important than ever to be talking about this. From a Vodafone perspective, we just for the benefit of everyone, we operate in 25 countries. We have relationships around the world with other operators, but we're in 25 markets ourselves with our own operations. We have about 100,000 employees, and we're operating mainly through Europe and Africa. And I'd say our focus has been very much in three areas. First of all, through our Vodafone Foundation, we focused on technology solutions. We want to apply technology to help tackle this abuse, domestic violence. And I'd probably refer to three things we've been seeing in terms of shifts whilst under the coronavirus. First is, as you rightly say, Bright Sky app. We're very proud of that app. It's an app that essentially gives a directory of key services. It's a tool for educating on the subject, for raising awareness, but also it provides the ability to do a questionnaire so that you can do a self-assessment of your own situation and provide a secure journal log. So we're very passionate about that and the adoption of that app to ensure that we raise the awareness and support those impacted. We've got out to 4 countries. I really want to take it across the whole of our footprint. And what we've seen over the period of the coronavirus is we've seen a 75% increase in the download of the app, which is fantastic. So number one, not good that obviously there is a surge, but it's really good that people understand that there's a tool there that can help them at this difficult moment. And so we now have 50,000 downloads of the app, and we really want to promote and encourage the adoption of this. So that's one part of the technology. The other one is Texos, which is a specialized phone which has one button you press, and it immediately sends a message to the police force, and the police force can immediately respond, understanding the situation and location. And we have 20,000 of those devices that have been issued. Again, we're expanding that. And then the third is in South Africa. I'd highlight we have a 24/7 operation supporting domestic violence and abuse. I've been there at the site. We've gone through, sat down with the team, fantastic team, and they've seen a 75% increase in call volume into the centre. So there definitely is the shadow pandemic that's happening. I'd say, secondly, in terms of, to your point, internally, we've done just as much within our organisation. I think we have to show leadership in our companies. So as you say, we brought a global policy. That was a lot about helping specialised counselling and support of our employees, and also to give them time to work through the issue. So to your point, 10 days paid leave to support them through that very difficult period. And that's not in one go. You can take it, when you need that support. We're also going through very specific training for our HR professionals and managers, because in a way, everyone has to go through an awareness, a learning to be able to support on a wider basis. And in these situations of working from home, what we needed to do was repurpose that counselling and training in a virtual way. So webinars, blogs, etc. We gave tools to encourage people to continue to understand the issues and the challenges and support their teams. And then the third area is just, we want to help other employers, other companies also take steps forward. And so we created a guide for employers. We said, if you want to go on the journey that we've been on, here are the type of policies, here's the type of tools, this is what we've done, so that it helps them think about the subject themselves. And again, we've done a lot online to help mobilize that in the lockdown situation. So we're very passionate about the subject. You can tell we really want to make an impact, want to confront this. We've got a lot of passion, a lot of commitment, and technology that we want to bring to bear to help really eradicate this.
Thank you very much. And I can definitely tell the commitment and the passion. And I think it's so important coming from the highest rank, the CEO of the company, because we have seen as a good practice around the world that when we have high-level political will and conveying the message to everyone within the organization that addressing these issues, addressing violence within the workplace, but also being an entry point for many women that they do not know how to seek support except in the workplaces, it's very important. And I think also you pointed out a whole of organization approach to violence against women, which is also very important. And I think, as Ariel said before, it's so important that you want to bring other employers and companies to address this issue, because as Ariel said before, we are expecting that after the restrictions of lockdown are loosening somehow, and women will start returning to the workplaces, we might have an increase of demands for support from the workplaces. So thank you very much for raising these important issues. And I would like now to turn to Nick. Sorry, to Bruce Cleaver, the CEO of the DBS Group, which is a global organization. And like your organization, Bruce, there is some responsibility not only towards your employees, but also towards your communities that you are servicing. And we know that you have been in Southern Africa region and in Canada. And can you please share your practices and how you have been responding to address GBV, and why you personally invested to address GBV? And I heard that some other family members, they're pretty invested as well. So maybe there is some family commitment there. Over to you.
Well, thanks, Calliope. Firstly, thanks very much for having me on, and really like to echo Nick's sentiments about A, the privilege of being involved with UN Women, and B, the importance of this topic. I don't think there can be a more important topic, frankly. We at De Beers are, like Nick's organization, is a global organization. We employ 22,000 people around the world. But a significant part of our business is our mining operations. And we mine in remote places. We mine in remote places in South Africa, in Botswana, and in Namibia. And also in the far northwest in Canada, just outside the Arctic Circle. Now, I can only echo what the previous panelists have said about the increase in gender-based violence. It's always been an issue, I think, but the statistics we have are really frightening. So, for example, in the first week post-lockdown, there were more than 2,300 calls relating to gender-based violence to the South African police force in South Africa, which is about a 40% increase on what would normally be seen. And the South African National Gender-Based Violence Command Centre indicated that it had about a tripling of the number of calls that came in the first week. So I think that just exacerbates, COVID has clearly exacerbated this, but it shows you how serious the problem is. Now, to touch on the community point, most of our employees, as I say, are in remote places, in places that are difficult to get to. And they are so intertwined with the communities that we don't regard our role here as helping only our employees, because our employees are such a big part of our communities and they're so intertwined with our communities that for us, it's really one and the same thing. So a lot of our response here is in the community areas. And that's not just in this area, it's in areas of health, employment, etc. Now, we found rather disappointingly that some of the infrastructure is really under pressure. Some of it's quite rudimentary. And as you would expect in this period, with potentially people caught in lockdown, maybe police forces overwhelmed, that the situation's actually got worse than it used to be. So the way we've gone about trying to approach helping ameliorate this to some extent is to work with our partners. So, as you know, obviously been working with UN Women for some time, but also we work with the ministries of gender in South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. And we've had long-standing relationships with all of those, where we really focus on helping female micro-entrepreneurs in those areas to grow their businesses. And it's been a helpful place for us to start. So we've worked with the UN Women's Southern African team first to try and understand what the problem is, what the lay of the land is, what the organizations are out there that we can work with, and what the needs people have. And actually, we've used UN Women's referral pathways to understand the diverse needs along the pathway of a survivor. And based on all of that, we've focused our efforts in three areas. One is addressing basic needs. The second one is providing remote counseling services, and we found that's particularly important. And the third one is really helping with infrastructure, which perhaps we take too much for granted, actually. So to give you some examples of that, at the Venetia mine in South Africa, which is far in the north of South Africa, we've worked with victim support groups and we've worked with the local police in order to understand what the needs are to help victims of gender-based violence. And we're doing things to help refurbish the facilities. So we find that unless we do something, the facilities will include things like there are only 2 bedrooms available. So the bedrooms for perhaps women and children, men who are victims of gender-based violence may have to sleep in a cell, and that's very traumatic. So we help by constructing additional bedrooms. For example, in these police stations, there's no designated place to interview victims and to support them. And so we've been involved in building those, because you can imagine how traumatic it is to give a statement in a police cell. Things like ensuring there's a lounge available for victims' children to stay in and feel safe in and to play in. Fully equipped kitchens for people to actually cook their own food. These may sound like quite basic things, but actually they're tremendously important to victims to be able to feel that they've come to a place of safety. And so we've done a lot of work in those kind of areas. But we find that the need to respond is different in each community. So in Namibia, the research shows us that younger people are much more likely to be comfortable using a phone for counseling than older people. And interestingly, young men who've suffered from gender-based violence are really far more likely to use a remote service than to want to be face-to-face. So we've had to try and tailor our response to be able to help funding in both areas. Botswana, we try and assist across the country, but we particularly focused on the Okavango Delta area, which is in the far north, where there's very limited support. So whatever support we can give there, and even starting with things like being able to speak to people in languages that they can understand, has actually been very, very helpful. So at a community level, that's the way we've gone about approaching this. For me personally, and I think for the whole organization, we've learned that engaging men is a really important part of this. So if you can get men to come along in the journey, you can certainly probably help to break the cycle of domestic violence. So we work with organizations, a particularly nice one for us to work with in Botswana is called Men and Boys for Gender Equality. And actually, when we started our diversity program before COVID, we went to them to ask them for help in talking to our mine staff in Botswana. And we're now talking with them, and they're helping us talk more to communities and understand communities' needs. And they work in a way that is appropriate in the circumstances. They work with traditional leaders. They tailor the language that they use. They make sure the traditional leaders are part of the solution. And they have some quite innovative ways too, like working with Sunday football teams in order to get the right level of support across the group. But what they've learned, and I think this is very important, is that one of the best ways of breaking the cycle of violence is to get men who have in fact been perpetrators of violence to help them, to counsel them, and to have them go back into communities a different person. And I think that's a very significant area of focus for us. They also work in a way that's quite similar to UN Women, in that they partner with important, well-known local business people or football players, or politicians, to kind of get the message out. So actually, it's an organisation that we are very keen to help. But we find out from the research that organisations that are designed to help men are in general find it very hard to raise funding. So in a way, we didn't go into this thinking that would be an area necessarily we would help funding, but it's turned out to be a very significant area, and I think an area that can help a lot. So we've supported that too. Inside the group, De Beers, we obviously have significant programs around addressing this issue. We have strong anti-violence, anti-bullying, and anti-victimization programs in any event that we've rolled out. We've got a strong mental health component to all of this, and we have a very strong focus at De Beers in trying to get people to show up at work the best they can be. And our diversity programs and our diversity hiring in the De Beers group is aimed around that. So we've been able to use those as platforms to help people in the De Beers group to recognize the issue, to understand the issue, and also to know where they can go and get help, whether it's at national level, whether that's at community level, or whether that's in a company. We have a number of online engagements. We have an app similar to, I think, to the one Nick spoke about, where people in the organization can go to get help. And we have a strong cohort of what we call mental health first aiders. And they are really designed and trained to spot people in the organization who are having difficulties with mental health issues. So these are all useful platforms and programs for us to try and get the message out, and also to help people, whether they're in a city environment, because this happens just as much in cities, or whether they're in a rural environment, to help our employees do that too. And then another area that I think is worth talking about is the particular impact this is having on women and girls. So a lot of our focus in this area has traditionally been on helping small, medium, and micro entrepreneurs in the areas around our communities to run their businesses better and more successfully, for all kinds of reasons that make tremendous sense. Well, of course, as those businesses have dried up, there is more risk for those women and girls, and there's more risk for them to be victims of violence. So we've tried to keep in touch with them, to speak to them, to understand what their needs are, so that as we come out of this, we can help them kickstart their businesses again and generate more independence and more ability to be independent. And we see that there are areas where, lack of bandwidth, these kind of things are impacting on people's ability to be educated. Sexual and reproductive health is difficult to get advice on at a time like this. So we're also very focused on women and girls who are in remote areas, I think, suffering a great deal here. So, just to sum up for De Beers, it's a whole host of issues, but very much around our communities. As a mining company, of course, you can't operate in a mining environment unless your communities welcome you. And so for us, it's been, for a long period of time, very important to work with our communities, provide as much employment as we can. And this is, in a sense, an extension of that. We have to be successful in our communities, not just in our mines. So it's been it's a long journey. I think there's a lot of it that we need to keep doing, but I think we've learned a great deal and have been able to help people a tremendous amount. Now, from my own personal point of view, I have a daughter and a son. I've never seen any reason why my daughter should have less opportunities than my son. They are teenagers or just over that, and they continually challenge me on these kind of topics, as they should. And I clearly welcome that debate and enjoy being part of it. So, it's a seriously important piece of work for all of us, and certainly for us at De Beers Group.
Thank you so much, Bruce. You raised some very, very important issues, and I particularly like how your company has adopted the survivor-centered approach to the way you put certain services in place and approaching women in the communities, which is very important. Also, the second point that you raised, which is very important, how you amplify the role of different community members, such traditional leaders in the communities, where they can have broader influence to change social norms and attitudes around GBV. And thirdly, I think it's very important the broader impact of violence against women and girls on other areas of development, such as education, for example, and the overall economic growth of communities and countries. And we do know that the cost of violence against women and girls is huge, in certain cases and countries, rising up to trillions of dollars, which is very alarming. Thank you very much. And I think you raised also some very good entry points for our last but not least panelist around the role of the police forces as first respondents to violence against women and girls. And we have the pleasure to also welcome Giles York, the Chief Constable of Sussex Police. And we know that the police sector plays a very important role to respond to violence against women and girls, especially during COVID-19, where we know, for example, that sometimes it's only police forces. It's only police forces that they are in the streets, for example, and they're able to enforce social distancing and monitoring what's happening, including for domestic violence cases. And we know that the police officers, can you colleagues please mute your mics? And usually the police officers that they are responding are male, and calls are usually made by women. So Giles, if you can explain to us a little bit how COVID-19 has impacted your overall approach to these responses, and if you can tell us and give us some advice how citizens and communities can continue to keep our community safe. Over to you. Thank you.
Calliope, first and foremost, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. I think an awful lot of what I wanted to say in response to your questions happily does build on what each of the speakers has already said. I will talk about reporting a bit and where reporting is changing, as we've seen it change under the COVID crisis, exactly mirroring what Ariel has been saying. I will talk a bit about how we have to respond differently to this, exactly as Nick was saying, and using technology and other things in order to be different. And absolutely aligned with Bruce is our partners are absolutely critical in finding a successful way through this. So first and foremost to those is about, so what's different? What's been different in the last 2 months in policing, reporting, and particularly domestic abuse? Exactly as you've said, you cannot do policing and always maintain social distancing. The two just don't go together. So absolutely, there's been a drive within the organization, just like in your organizations, around saying, what is it that's essential? What do we have to keep in place? And huge swathes of my own workforce are working from home where they can. But those very response officers that you describe cannot work from home. They must come into work. They must go out in the cars. You can't arrest somebody remotely. You have to put your hands on them. And so all of these things are challenges for us as an organization. And also through all of this, we have been given a new priority across the UK for protecting the capacity of the NHS. So policing have been also enforcing new regulations around travel, around mixing, around what you can or can't do at different stages during this challenge. So the number of calls to the police has reduced dramatically. The reporting of crime to the police has reduced dramatically. because we're not getting fights outside pubs anymore. We're not getting the number of car crashes that we had before, but we are still getting a very high level of demand around policing COVID. And equally to, as Ariel says, we are seeing in the context of nearly all crime reducing, we're still seeing the same, if not a slight increase of reporting of domestic abuse coming into policing. So absolutely, this remains a priority for us. So what I wanted to move on to say is, how are we responding to say, what are we going to do differently around this? Because if you are being abused within your relationship, then absolutely what lockdown means, wherever you are in the world, it means you're being locked down with your abuser. That might mean it is more difficult to call for help. It may be more difficult to report what's happening to you. So absolutely, we are trying new and different methods to allow people to be able to report safely. The app that Nick described is an absolute godsend to people. So it can look like they're doing normal business, but actually what they're doing is they're reporting a crime to us. We've set up our own messaging systems so that people can enter into a WhatsApp conversation with an officer and be able to report things without having to pick up the phone, make a phone call, or anything else like that. And so absolutely we're still there. And there's still things like, if they do want to phone, and there's a case we've got in my own force where the lady reporting, if you heard the conversation from her end of the phone, was ordering a pizza. It was absolutely clear from the controller who answered that call, she was reporting domestic abuse happening to her there and then, and was able to ask questions in such a way that she elicited the information so we could respond as safely as possible for that individual. So it is absolutely key that we are able to tailor and change our responses at this time, because we must respond to domestic abuse and we must respond to it differently. And as to the gender of the people who are responding at any given time, we have done a lot of work internally across Sussex Police, across police forces across the country, around driving the empathy and the understanding. And there's something very powerful about wearing a uniform, because quite often when you turn up, they don't really give a stuff about your gender. They don't really give a stuff about anything above the neck. Actually, what they want is to see the police, and they don't mind what that looks like. And so absolutely, time and again, sometimes gender is not relevant to what happens in these instances, and sometimes it is. But I think one of the really interesting twists in this is where we use the technology described by Nick, then gender becomes irrelevant, because actually you could be talking to absolutely anybody at the end of one of these conversations, and it just doesn't matter. But I do think for the longer term, we need to be able to hold on to some of these changes. Absolutely, we work incredibly closely with our partners in this space, time and time again. And to be really clear, policing, enforcement, the law is not always the best solution for many victims who find themselves with these challenges. So it's only by working with our partners who can give alternative solutions to the challenges that people face and understand what is best for the victim, which is some of the learning that we have been through. So Calliope, I'm really pleased and privileged to join the panel you've brought together this afternoon. We are facing something that's incredibly different, remains incredibly concerning, and absolutely we are doing things differently in order to be able to match it, and fully intend to do that with our partners as part of our learning on the back of this.
Thank you, Giles, for these excellent and comprehensive responses, and we really appreciate the work of the police forces as first respondents to GBV and domestic abuse. Thank you very much, all the panelists, and we have some time left for some questions and answers. that the audience has already shared with us before and on social media, and you will have a couple of minutes to respond to some of them. If I can start with you, Ariel, from Safe Horizon. We got a very interesting question from our audience. What do statistics and research tell us about how domestic violence and abuse affects different social classes, and what can I do to support those most in need? Over to you, Ariel. You have a couple of minutes.
Thank you. Well, we know that domestic violence affects people in every walk of life, no matter whether you're very rich or have very little economic resources, it can affect anyone. And we also know that the incidence is higher among those who have the least, and the choices of those who have the least are fewer. So if you are economically dependent on an abusive partner, for example, and you live in a place where, you know, housing is expensive and there are shortages, you may be facing homelessness if you leave an abusive situation. And so that means that the fewer resources that you have, that's just an example, the fewer choices that you have and the worse your choices and options are. For that reason, I would recommend that anybody who wants to help support organizations, and we've heard examples of so many of them from the other speakers here today, organizations that help men, help women. Typically, these organizations will focus on people who have the least. Not exclusively. At Safe Horizon, we help people, again, at every economic level, but those who have the least need the most kinds of support that money can help with, like help with housing, like help with food and other basic necessities, like help with legal services and mental health treatment and support. So I would say for the average individual, besides being aware of people that you know and distress that they may be in, honestly, supporting organizations whose expertise it is to do this work may be the most powerful thing that you can do.
I agree very much. And we know that these organizations have been struggling financially for a very long time, and they might not exist during COVID-19 and its aftermath to provide services to survivors in the longer term if we don't support them right now. Thank you. Thank you for this very important point. If I can move to Bruce from the Beers Group. Bruce, you raised excellent points during your presentation, but if you can tell us, we have a question from the audience. When it comes to GBV, what has changed for you since COVID-19?
Yeah, great question. I think, we started a significant piece on gender equality at De Beers a couple of years ago, and so we've made a good start on this, and we have certainly taken that to the minds and the communities and the areas in which we work. Our parent company, Anglo American, launched a very strong program on gender-based violence last year called Living with Dignity. So we came into this, I think, with a reasonable platform, but I think we were surprised through the outreaches that we did that I spoke about at how difficult the situation is in remote places. So I think for us, it's really, this has accelerated the need for us to do something. And it's, we did have relationships with some of these shelters that I'd spoken about, but didn't clearly have as much detail as we might have, and now are aware more of what we need to do to try and help quicker. So for me, it's really balancing two things. I mean, obviously all businesses are facing significant economic difficulties at the moment. So it's trying to protect the kind of investment we would always have made in gender-based violence and making sure we continue to do that, but do it in a quicker way and a more effective way, given that the need is now so obvious and so dire. So it hasn't led to an entire change of strategy, but what it certainly has led to is a need to do this quicker, better, more efficiently, because it is just so clear what the need is right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this response. If I can turn to Giles from the Sussex Police, and And we had a question about how cases of GBV can be handled mostly by male police officers, and I think you responded very well to that. So maybe I can move to another question from the audience, more around community members. What can we do as local community members to learn more about what is happening around GBV and domestic abuse? Over to you, Giles.
For me, Calliope, I think it's about making no assumptions. Absolutely, as Ariel says, this is something that covers all breadths of society. Just because we think we might live in a nice neighborhood and we have nice and decent friends who have relationships with their partners that are like our relationships with our partners, it's just about being alive to this and always being aware and being an open person that people can come to and talk to. And maybe it's because of the role I do, but more than once, one of my own friends has come to me and said, not necessarily about themselves, possibly maybe, but I think my neighbor, I think my friend, I think my cousin is going through a difficult time. Please, can you tell me what to do about it? And I think the expectation on the community isn't that they've got to solve everything, but I think each and every one of us should know where to be able to signpost that person. Each and every one of us should know a number, an organization, to be able to say, phone these people. They are expert at what they do. They know what they're doing in confidence, and they can help you. So that's what I would ask from the local community, is be alive, be brave enough to have those difficult conversations and be equipped with something that can help them.
This is excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm turning over to Nick from Vodafone. Nick, if you can please let us know what changes the audience is asking. What changes would you like to see in eliminating GBV from society, and also when it comes to gender equality? This is a very simple question, just to answer in a couple of minutes, but have a go.
It's about as broad as you can ask. Look, I think if you stand back, you say what you really want is the elimination of violence, that essentially it's not acceptable. So you want zero tolerance. And I think when you get to the point of zero tolerance, you say, well, today, studies have shown that, I think it's a UN study, that less than 40% of women who've experienced violence have actually sought help. So it really builds a little bit on Giles. A lot is going on in the community. Not everyone is reaching out. Not everyone knows how to reach out. The society itself hasn't established yet a zero tolerance. So my ambition, my goal would be that society comes together. And I think it's really interesting. This is a fantastic panel of individuals coming from different angles in life. What we need is that three-pronged approach. We need government, we need companies, we need community to come together to solve this and to really set that zero tolerance. And then once you've set that mindset, then it's about what are the tools, what's the education, what are the things that we can do. And I'd say this is what we've been really focused on, is providing those tools, whether it's Bright Sky, Texos, other tools, to say how do we, but you must have that three-pronged approach, I believe. And I think Bruce also was emphasizing that companies and communities and governments, NGOs, all need to come together really to try and solve this.
Thank you. This is a very important point, and we have growing evidence supporting what you have just highlighted so well, that we cannot have just governments addressing violence or single parts of society, but we all need to join forces and address this complex phenomenon from our respective areas of expertise and networks. We have a couple of minutes left, So I would like to ask you if you have any comments, any additional suggestions, 1 minute last thoughts that you would like to share with the audience. Ariel, over to you. Any last thoughts, comments?
I was struck, Giles, when you said make no assumptions. I like that because I think that in terms of what victims and survivors need, we can offer an array of options, and then the most respectful thing that centers the humanity of the victim is for them to decide what they need. And so I just celebrate all of the panelists and all of the work that everyone is doing to greatly increase the options and the pathways and the avenues that victims of domestic violence have to seek help in ways that work for them.
This was beautiful, Ariel. Thank you for sharing and reminding us as well. Giles, may I turn to you for some last minute reflections?
Absolutely. I think that there is something about always keeping the channel open and allowing people to report and even understand that they are suffering abuse is sometimes the first hurdle that people need to be able to overcome. And once they've realized that, it's my responsibility, it's our responsibility. And I absolutely take my hat off to Vodafone for the leave that they will give people to be allowed to address these challenges in their personal life when they see it in a really open way. It is about having difficult, challenging, sometimes upsetting conversations and allowing people to talk to us. It is our personal responsibility.
That was fantastic. May I turn to you, Nick, please?
I would just say, first of all, this is a very challenging societal topic. And the most important thing is, as Giles said, we have to raise and elevate the conversation more publicly so people understand and can support. And therefore, I think the HeForShe community is doing a fantastic job of that most important thing, which is raising visibility on the subject, having open conversations so people can start to work solutions. And as I say, from a three-pronged approach. So I think I just commend everyone that's putting the time and energy into this.
Excellent. And last but not least, Bruce, some last comments and thoughts.
So thanks again for the opportunity. I think it's a tremendous panel to be part of. And I don't really have much to add to what the three panelists have already said. I think it is all about, as they've all said, it is all about being open, being aware, listening to people. And I think all of us, men even more than women, have an obligation, to use those words that Giles mentioned, be alive and be brave. Unless people are going to start to do things that are uncomfortable and call out uncomfortable things again and again and again without fear, we'll struggle to solve this problem. So the answer exists in amongst all of us, I think.
Thank you very much, all of you, for this really excellent discussion that we had this morning, this afternoon, for some of you, and for your time to participate. I know it's busy times for all of us, but raising awareness, being together, joining forces, and having solidarity to survivors of violence is really important. I would like to thank also the audience and the other participants for joining us. And I would like to remind them to share their thoughts on social media using the hashtags, #HeForShe, #ShadowPandemic, and to tag us at HeForShe. And also you will be receiving an email with the recording of this public discussion. And also you can visit the HeForShe website at heforshe.org for any of the resources mentioned during the session today. Thank you very much. Be well and be safe. Bye-bye from UN Women and HeForShe.